It was an ordinary morning at the town courthouse when a 73-year-old man walked through the front doors. His clothes were worn, his shoes faded, and in his trembling hands he carried an old leather bag. The judge barely lifted his eyes from the stack of papers as the man approached the witness stand. Just another routine case, he thought, never imagining that within minutes his entire career would be shaken. Whatever was inside that bag would forever change what everyone believed about that old man. The courtroom was packed. The case at hand was a traffic dispute that had grown bigger because of the political connections of one of the parties involved. Judge Benjamin Harrison, known for his rigidity and sharp temper, presided over the session with his usual impatience. Harrison had built a reputation for toughness that had placed him in high-profile cases. When the elderly man approached the witness stand, a quiet murmur rippled through the room. His appearance stood in stark contrast to the formal environment. His slacks were slightly wrinkled, his dress shirt had a few loose threads, and his shoes showed clear signs of heavy wear. He carried an old brown leather bag that looked like it had seen better days. "Marital status and occupation?" asked the clerk, Michael Torres, mechanically, without even looking up at the man. "Retired," the old man answered, his voice calm but slightly trembling. There was a natural dignity in his posture, even in such an intimidating setting. Judge Harrison raised his eyes for the first time and failed to hide his expression of disdain. His glasses slid slightly down his nose as he studied the witness. "Retired from what exactly?" he asked in a tone that made a few attorneys chuckle quietly. The old man hesitated for a moment, as if choosing his words carefully. "From public service, Your Honor." "Public service," the judge repeated with biting irony. "What kind of public service? Janitorial work, gardening, park maintenance?" The laughter grew louder around the courtroom. Defense attorney Richard Linford, representing the accused, adjusted his Italian silk tie and whispered something to his assistant, a young blonde lawyer in a flawless suit. Both laughed quietly. Security officers Danny Morrow and Marcus Taylor exchanged amused glances near the main door, and even some of the jurors seemed to find it funny. The old man stayed silent, gripping the strap of his leather bag tighter. His hands, marked by time and labor, trembled slightly. No one could tell if it was nerves, age, or something deeper. "Mr. The judge dragged his finger slowly down the papers in front of him. "Mr. William Patterson, you are here as a witness to a traffic accident you claim to have seen at the corner of Michigan Avenue and Roosevelt Road. I'd like you to tell us in your own words what you saw that day." William Patterson drew in a deep breath and began recounting the events clearly and precisely. His voice, though quiet, carried a natural authority. He described the sequence in striking detail: the exact time of the accident, the weather conditions, the approximate speed of the vehicles, the position of each car before and after the collision. He even mentioned small details like the color of the traffic light and the presence of pedestrians nearby. But Judge Harrison seemed more interested in discrediting the witness than in listening to his careful testimony. He constantly interrupted with sarcastic questions. "Mr. Patterson, are you absolutely sure about what you're saying? People your age often mix up important details. The memory isn't quite the same at—" "How old are you again?" 73, Your Honor," William replied firmly. "And I am certain of what I saw." "Oh, 73 and certain," the judge laughed sarcastically, prompting more laughter from the audience. "Tell me, do you wear glasses? Any hearing problems? Do you take medication that might affect your memory or perception?" The questions dripped with disdain, and the atmosphere in the courtroom began to grow heavy. William answered each one with admirable patience, keeping his dignity despite the public humiliation. "I use reading glasses, my hearing is fine, and I don't take any medication that affects my cognition." Sensing the judge's attitude and deciding to exploit it, Attorney Linford rose smoothly. "Your Honor, I believe it would be prudent to question this witness's credibility more deeply. His appearance and social condition suggest a life of hardship that could easily motivate—" "Exactly, Counselor Linford," the judge cut in, clearly pleased with the direction. "Mr. Patterson, do you have a criminal record? Problems with alcohol or other substances?" Significant debts that might motivate you to give false testimony in exchange for financial gain? A heavy silence fell over the courtroom. William Patterson closed his eyes for a moment, as if gathering strength or searching for patience deep within himself. When he opened them again, something had changed. There was determination in his gaze that hadn't been there before. "No, Your Honor," he said firmly. "I've never had trouble with the law, I've never drunk more than I should, and I've never lied for money. My word has always been my honor." Judge Harrison laughed loudly this time, a harsh sound that echoed against the walls of the courtroom. "Your honor? What honor, Mr. Patterson? The honor of a man who can barely afford decent clothes? The honor of someone who probably lives off government benefits?" The silence that followed was deafening. Even the most insensitive in the room seemed to feel the weight of the humiliation being inflicted on the old man. William gripped his leather bag tighter, his knuckles turning white from the pressure. For a moment, it looked like he was about to give up, stand up and walk away with what little dignity he had left. But something made him hold his ground, like a soldier standing at attention. That was when security guard Danny Morrow, a middle-aged man, stepped closer, uneasy about the old man's tight grip on the bag. "Sir, I need to check your bag before we continue." For the first time since arriving, William hesitated. He looked down at the bag in his hands as if it carried something very precious. Slowly, with visible reluctance, he handed it to the guard. Morrow opened the bag and began to inspect its contents. At first, only ordinary items: a worn-out leather wallet, a few folded papers, a white handkerchief, a small Bible with pages yellowed by time. But then his hand touched something that made him stop completely. It was a piece of fabric, carefully folded, and underneath it something that caught the fluorescent light of the courtroom with a faint, unmistakable shine. Security guard Danny Morrow froze the moment his fingers touched the metal object beneath the folded cloth. His expression shifted instantly, from routine disinterest to genuine surprise. He lifted his eyes toward William Patterson, who remained silent, watching every movement with a mix of resignation and dignity. "What is it, Morrow?" Judge Harrison asked impatiently. "Some problem with the luggage of our distinguished citizen?" Danny hesitated, holding the object with careful reverence. It was a military medal, heavy and well-preserved, with a faded but still recognizable ribbon. Beside it lay a metal insignia he knew well. His own father had served in Vietnam. "Mr. Patterson," Morrow said, his voice lower now, almost respectful. "This medal, it's mine," William answered simply. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Judge Harrison frowned, clearly annoyed that his performance had been interrupted. "Morrow, finish this quickly. We don't have all day to waste on trinkets." But the guard couldn't take his eyes off the medal. He recognized it. It was a silver star, one of the nation's highest military honors. Alongside it were insignias marking combat service in Vietnam. "Your Honor," Morrow said, still holding the items, "I think you should see this." "See what?" Harrison scoffed. That was when a firm voice cut through the tense air of the courtroom. "One moment, Your Honor." Everyone turned to see who had spoken. At the back of the room, a middle-aged man in military uniform had risen to his feet. Colonel James Mitchell, present as an observer, walked slowly down the center aisle. "Colonel Mitchell," the judge said, startled by the unexpected interruption. "What do you think you're doing?" "Carrying out my duty, Your Honor," Mitchell replied as he approached the table where Morrow had placed the military items. "May I examine these decorations?" Judge Harrison was visibly irritated but unwilling to deny the request of a senior officer. "Make it quick, Colonel." Mitchell lifted the silver star with the same reverence Morrow had shown. He examined it from every angle, checked the serial number engraved on the back, and studied the insignia. His face was stern and focused. "Mr. Patterson," the colonel said, turning to him, "you served with the 1st Infantry Battalion, correct?" William nodded slowly. "Yes, sir." "Vietnam, 1968 to 1970. The colonel stepped closer until he stood directly in front of William, still holding the decorations. "And this silver star, was it awarded for combat actions?" The courtroom was silent now. Every trace of laughter had vanished. Attorney Linford had stopped whispering to his assistant. Even Judge Harrison seemed to have lost his usual arrogance. "It was," William answered, his voice stronger this time. Mitchell turned back to the table where more items from William's bag were laid out. There were old black and white photographs, young soldiers in combat gear, some smiling at the camera despite the dirt and exhaustion on their faces. One of the photos showed William, decades younger, standing beside other soldiers in front of a helicopter. "Colonel," Judge Harrison interrupted, trying to reclaim control. "With all due respect, I fail to see how this is relevant to the matter at hand. Mr. Patterson is here as a witness to a traffic accident, not to talk about his so-called military career." The colonel pulled out his phone and dialed a number. "Captain Rodriguez? I need you to check some records for me." "Yes, urgent." He dictated the medal's serial number and a few other details from the documents. "I understand," Mitchell said after a few minutes. "Thank you, Captain." He hung up and turned back to the courtroom. "Your Honor, I've just confirmed that Sergeant William Patterson, retired, is indeed a decorated Vietnam veteran. His Silver Star was awarded for extraordinary bravery during a rescue operation under heavy enemy fire. He saved the lives of 7 men that day, while being wounded himself." The silence in the courtroom was so deep you could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights. Judge Harrison had gone pale, his arrogance evaporating like morning mist. The colonel paused, letting his words sink into the tense room. "And as for his credibility as a witness," Mitchell continued, "I can assure you, Your Honor, that men like Sergeant Patterson were trained to observe, remember, and report details with absolute precision. On the battlefield, it was a matter of life and death." William Patterson had remained silent throughout the revelation, but tears glistened faintly in his eyes, not of shame or humiliation, but of something deeper, perhaps relief at finally having his dignity recognized. Judge Harrison looked around the courtroom, taking in the shocked and embarrassed expressions on the faces around him. Attorney Linford had lowered his head, unable to meet anyone's eyes. The security guards stood motionless, their faces solemn. And then something extraordinary began to happen. Colonel Mitchell was the first. Slowly, he came to attention and raised his right hand to his brow in a salute, a gesture of respect and gratitude, his eyes fixed firmly on William Patterson. Colonel Mitchell's salute was like a stone cast into a still lake, sending ripples through the entire courtroom. William Patterson, still seated at the witness stand, felt the weight of that moment press against his chest like a clenched fist. For a few seconds that seemed like an eternity. The two men locked eyes, the active duty colonel honoring the retired sergeant. The silence in the courtroom was so complete, you could hear people's breathing. Then something unexpected happened. Security guard Danny Morrow, still holding William's decorations with reverence, slowly straightened. His right hand rose to his brow in a respectful salute. His father had taught him as a boy to honor veterans, and now that lesson came to life in the most powerful way. Morrow's movement caught the eye of his partner, Marcus Taylor, who hesitated only briefly before also coming to attention. He had never served in the military, but he recognized the historic weight of the moment. It was then that Judge Benjamin Harrison felt the full weight of his actions. His cruel words echoed in his mind like accusations. He had publicly humiliated a war hero, a man who had risked his life for the very freedom Harrison enjoyed every day. The judge looked at William Patterson, truly saw him for the first time that morning. He was not just an elderly man poorly dressed for a courtroom. He was someone who had faced enemy fire to save lives. He was a hero who had returned home and lived a simple, dignified life without ever seeking recognition or glory. Slowly, Judge Harrison rose from his chair. His hands trembled slightly as he stood tall. He had never served, but he knew that some moments transcend protocol and formality. With deliberate movements, he raised his right hand to his brow, saluting the man he had tried to tear down only minutes before. The judge's gesture became a signal for the rest of the courtroom. One by one, people began to rise. The clerk stood next, followed by Attorney Linford, who had taken part in the humiliation. His face burned red with shame as he saluted. His assistant, The young lawyer who had laughed at the judge's taunts now had tears in her eyes as she offered her own salute. She thought of her grandfather, who had served in World War II and always spoke of the importance of honoring those who served. The jurors, one after another, left their seats. Among them were a retired nurse, a teacher, a mechanic, a homemaker, an accountant, and other ordinary citizens, all united in that moment by a respect that transcended social, economic, and political differences. In the gallery, people began to rise as well. An elderly man who had served in Korea saluted with tears streaming down his face. A mother held the hand of her teenage son as they stood together in respect. Law students observing the trial rose to their feet, realizing they were witnessing something far greater than a simple traffic case. William Patterson remained seated, watching the transformation unfold around him. His own tears now flowed freely. They were not tears of sadness or humiliation, but of deep, complex emotion. It was as if decades of quiet, unrecognized service were finally being honored. He thought of the comrades who had not come home, the friends lost. He thought of the struggle to readjust to civilian life, to find work, to explain nightmares to a wife who tried to understand. But he also thought of the men he had saved, of the families who were able to embrace their sons, husbands, and fathers again because of his actions. He thought of the true meaning of service, not glory or recognition, but the silent duty of protecting something greater than oneself. Colonel Mitchell held his salute, but his words cut through the silence. Sergeant Patterson, on behalf of the United States Armed Forces and everyone present here today, thank you for your service and sacrifice. Mitchell's voice echoed through the courtroom, carrying the weight of generations of service and sacrifice. It was more than gratitude. It was recognition, validation, an unspoken apology for all the times veterans like William had been ignored, belittled, or forgotten. At last, William rose to his feet, his legs trembling slightly, not from age or weakness, but from the emotional intensity of the moment. He stood at attention, just as he had been taught decades earlier, and returned the salute. His posture was flawless, as if the years had melted away, and he was once again the young soldier who had faced hell and lived to tell about it. The entire courtroom remained in salute, a sea of raised right hands honoring a man they had judged by his appearance. It was a moment of collective redemption, of recognizing wrongdoing, of humility before true greatness. The atmosphere had been transformed completely. There was no more laughter, no more disdain, only respect, shame, and a profound understanding that something sacred had nearly been desecrated. Judge Harrison cleared his throat, his voice breaking when he finally spoke. Sergeant Patterson, please accept my deepest apologies. This court, no, I myself, failed to recognize your honor and dignity. It is a failure I will carry with me forever. William nodded graciously, without bitterness in his eyes. He had learned long ago that forgiveness is more powerful than vengeance, that dignity is preserved through grace, not resentment. But the moment was not yet over. Something else was about to happen, something that would forever seal that extraordinary morning in the memory of everyone present. The silence held, heavy with meaning and expectation. The silence hanging over the courtroom was unlike anything those walls had ever witnessed. It was a silence heavy with reverence, remorse, and a profound understanding that everyone present had taken part in something that would change their lives forever. William Patterson remained standing. Colonel Mitchell stepped forward, carefully carrying the decorations that had revealed the truth. With reverent gestures, he placed them back inside the old leather bag, treating each item as the treasure it truly was. "Sergeant," Mitchell said in a low but steady voice, loud enough for all to hear, "it would be an honor to walk you to the door." William shook his head gently. "Thank you, Colonel, but that's not necessary. I came here to do my duty as a citizen, and that's exactly what I'll do." His simple words carried a dignity that touched every heart in the room. Even after the humiliation he had endured, he still saw himself as a public servant, someone with responsibilities to his community. Judge Harrison stepped down from the bench, something unthinkable under normal circumstances. He walked up to William, breaking decades of courtroom protocol. "Sergeant Patterson, he said, his voice trembling. "You came here to testify about a traffic accident. I'd like to hear your statement now, if you're still willing to give it." William looked around the courtroom, seeing faces that had shifted from mocking to respectful. "Of course, Your Honor. That's what I'm here for." And so, with a dignity that silenced any thought of interruption, William Patterson gave his testimony. He described the accident with the same precision he had shown at the beginning, but now his words were received with the respect they deserved. Every detail was listened to carefully, every observation treated as valuable evidence. When he finished, there were no sarcastic questions, no attempts to discredit him. Attorney Linford, who had taken part in the earlier humiliation, rose to his feet. "Your Honor," he said humbly, "I'd like to withdraw every objection I made to this witness's testimony. His credibility is beyond question." The trial proceeded quickly after that, but everyone knew the real outcome had already been reached. It wasn't about guilt or innocence in a traffic case. It was about recognition, respect, and human redemption. When the formal proceedings ended, William carefully organized his belongings inside the old leather bag. As he walked toward the exit, people formed a corridor of honor, everyone standing. William walked slowly down that aisle, his head held high, his dignity restored and magnified. He did not smile, he did not wave. He simply walked with the same quiet dignity he had carried all his life. At the courthouse door, he stopped and turned one last time. His gaze swept over the faces of those who had mocked him and now honored him. There was no triumph in his eyes, no bitterness, only the serenity of a man who had lived his life with honor and finally seen that honor recognized. "Thank you," he said simply. "It was an honor to serve." And with those words, William Patterson left the courtroom, leaving behind a group of people permanently changed. William Patterson went on living his simple, dignified life, never seeking attention or glory. But his presence that day had planted seeds of change that would continue to grow for generations. Perhaps the deepest change had taken place in each person who had been in that courtroom. They had learned that true honor isn't found in the clothes we wear or the wealth we hold. It lies in the service we give without expecting recognition, in the dignity we maintain even in the face of humiliation. William's old leather bag carried more than medals and photographs. It carried the reminder that true honor is quiet, heroism is humble, and dignity cannot be destroyed by those who fail to understand it. Because sometimes, all it takes to transform the world is a single moment of truth, a glimpse of who we really are beneath the surface. And on that day in the courtroom, everyone learned that true heroes rarely look the way we expect. They look like ordinary people who made extraordinary choices when the world needed them most. If you enjoyed this story, click the like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next.